Now, sometimes it's more efficient to allow your acrylic supplier to do some of your cutting. In my case, the supplier I use, Regal Plastics, will do minor cuts for free for me. When I ordered this, I ordered it as a 2-foot by 3-foot piece, and they got the length right. It's 36 inches, but it's always important to double check your work, and what I'm finding in this particular case is that it's 23 3/4, so it looks like they took the cut out of my material. And while it's not the end of the world because I can adjust my design, it would be a significant problem if I had proceeded to cut everything else based on this being 2 feet by 3 feet. It would have actually been a disaster because the bottom of my tank wouldn't have fit properly. So what I'm going to do at this point is go ahead and resize my sump just slightly to accommodate the 1/4 inch material that I'm missing. And I recommend that you label your pieces and do so in a consistent manner. Here are my sides, and you can see that I've drawn an arrow to indicate which direction is up. And this just helps you to orient your pieces correctly when you're putting them together. And what we'll do is we'll create the sides of the tank, and then we'll assemble the sides of the tank and some of the partitions, and the bottom will actually get glued on last. And by design, this will have a slight overlap, and I'll come back and finish it with a router, which will give me a nice smooth edge. Okay, so at this point I've got my saw adjusted for my first cut, which is 22.5 inches. And so what I'm going to do is trim my end pieces. And this will get loud because I have a shop vac and a table saw that'll be running. So one of the things I'll point out is that before I cut each piece, I check the edges to see if one edge is rougher than the other. So if you've got an edge that has a bump in it, you want to go ahead and cut the bump off. And this provides another opportunity to true your material. At this point, I'll set up for my next cut, and I'll be right back. Now, what I'm going to do at this point is I've set my saw up for a cut that is just under 24 inches because I'm going to run all 4 sides through so that I get the same height on all 4 sides with the same exact gauge or height. This will give me a really consistent assembly process and eliminate some of the things that are really frustrating. When you cut the pieces separately and you adjust your saw over and over again, chances are really good you're going to wind up with slightly different measurements, and the end result is you wind up with sides that are slightly different heights, and it's very frustrating when you're assembling a tank. So you should always plan your cuts so that you can make one adjustment and then make several cuts. I want to stop and point something out on this particular piece. When I was cutting the piece, I run my fingers through here, across here. You'll feel an imperfection before you'll see it. And here I feel that there's a little bit of a bump from when this material was cut by my vendor. So I went ahead and marked it so that I'm aware of the bump. And originally I had planned for this piece to install like this, but because there's a defect at the bottom of the panel here, I've gone ahead and reversed the direction. And that's why these arrows are important. It helps you keep track of your orientation and helps me assemble a better tank. If I was to assemble this with this defect, which is, you can't see this defect on camera, but there's just an every little bump there, and I'd either have to sand this off or I would have to cut the whole piece of material. And so the better solution is to just simply put the least desirable side towards the top, because the top doesn't have to be watertight, it just has to be strong, and I can get a strong bond here. And in case you're wondering, can I do this, because that's the reason most people are going to watch this type of video, the answer is yes. You need to have a good table saw, you need to have the appropriate safety gear, and then you need to be patient and methodical. You need to make a list of what you're going to cut, and then you need to very carefully cut it and check it. And the next cut is actually going to be more difficult. I've got a 3 foot by 4 foot piece of material. That's about the largest that I feel comfortable handling on my table saw. If it was any bigger than this, then what I would do is lay the material out on the floor with a 2 by 4 for support and build a jig and use a skill saw with a equally good blade. if you watched carefully, you'll notice I had some trouble maneuvering that 3 foot by 4 foot piece of material, and the slightest little wiggle while you're cutting results in an imperfect surface. So this is part of where I said it's important to be methodical and to plan your cuts carefully. So I know that the factory edge or the distributor edge is going to be cleaner than the edge that I can provide. So what I did is I went ahead and planned for it and realized that I would use my cut as the top. And in doing so, I'm able to produce a cleaner cut and a better finish. And you'll notice that I marked so that my cut is towards the top. I don't want to use my cut to seal water. It's not that I couldn't make my cut better, I'm just trying to do this the most efficient way and still produce an acceptable sump. Hi. So now I'm going to talk about how to assemble your acrylic tank if you're following along with my construction. I want to talk a little bit about the tools that I use. First, I've got some 90-degree clamps that I bought at Harbor Freight. They were about $8 a piece. There are other syringes on the market, but the syringes at the acrylic supplier are frankly kind of expensive. And I found that West Marine epoxy syringes worked a lot better for my needs. They have a fairly small opening, they're sold a dozen to a bag, and they're relatively inexpensive. One of the challenges that I find is the little squeeze bottle doesn't work real well for me. In fact, when I was doing my large tank, it made my hands hurt from squeezing for so long trying to get acrylic or glue to come out. And the second is that the materials, the chemicals that are in the solvent are really aggressive and they tend to eat the syringe. So I don't like to use these more than 2 or 3 times before I chuck them. After all, I'm not doing this to preserve syringes, I'm doing this to build a quality tank. And I also use a towel. And in this case, I'm using a table that's appropriately sized. This is a steel frame table, so it's nice and flat. It's nothing magical. Any solid flat surface will work for assembly. If you are assembling something larger, such as this tank, you obviously need a larger surface. In the winter, I like to do this out in my garage/shop. However, I live in Houston, Texas, in the United States. It's hot and it's muggy, and I really don't want to sweat to death while I swat away mosquitoes. So I've chosen to bring this indoors in my house in an area that's still under construction. This will eventually be my master bedroom. Right now I'm just kind of taking that project slow for budgetary reasons. And I want to talk just a moment. This is my 350-gallon saltwater tank. Right now the pumps are off because my sump sprung a leak about a week and a half ago. And these are my EcoZotic 100-watt LEDs. This tank is lit by 2 LEDs and 2 skylights. And I felt like this would make a great background for assembling the sump that goes with this tank. Thanks for watching. I've gone ahead and put my first couple pieces up on the table. I'm going to assemble the sides first. And when you're building a tank like this, you actually assemble all 4 sides. You flip it upside down. Or actually, I take that back. You flip it right side up. You join the bottom, and then you flip it around and join the other side. And actually, I take that back. What you actually do is you build the 4 sides. So you build your square sides, and then the next thing you need to do is you need to join the top. And you seal the top in, and you flip it over and trim it out, and you cut out your holes, and then you move the tank, put your bottom down, bring your tank back on, and then you seal the bottom of it. And that's the sequence that you use for building a display tank. In this particular case, I'm building a sump. I'm going to have some dividers in it. So I'm going to build the 3 sides, and then I'm going to start to install my dividers. And then I'll join the 4th side, and then I will flip it upside down and join the bottom. This tank is going to be constructed from 1/2 inch sides and a 3/8 inch bottom, more than sufficiently strong. The tank that's behind me, this side is 3/4 inch. Top, bottom, and the front and the back are 1/2 inch acrylic. I'm using primarily 2 types of acrylic. I'm using plexiglass G, which I actually really like this. It's a wonderful material. It cuts very, very cleanly. It's a joy to work with. And I'm also using, let me look at the label here. Chemcast GP. Chemcast GP is an acceptable material. However, it's not a joy to cut. It makes little tiny pieces, and it is a little bit harder to work with, in my opinion. This tank uses plexiglass G for the sides and Chemcast GP for the other pieces. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is position this, and then I use these to help position. Always takes me a second to remember how to position these clamps, but I put them on here loosely initially, and what these do is just hold my pieces vertical while they are drying. You'll also notice that my marks point up. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to peel back a little bit of acrylic where I'm going to make my joint, and I'll be right back.